Welcome everyone to today's Soho House Talk with artist Marguerite Humeau. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm really happy we're gathered here. My name is Stephanie Seidel. I'm the Monica and Blake Grossman Curator at ICA Miami. I'm on the panel here with Marguerite Humeau to my right, audience left, and Alex Gartenfeld, ICA Miami's director and co-curator on this wonderful exhibition we just opened on Tuesday. To just briefly introduce the artist, Marguerite Humeau is an interdisciplinary artist who works across a huge variety of media, and she's interested in the intersection of art, science, and technology. She was born in France and lives in London, and this exhibition at ICA is her first major US museum solo show. However, she's widely accomplished and has exhibited internationally. Most recently at the Gwangju Biennial in Korea. She was part of the Venice Biennial in 2022 in the group exhibition The Milk of Dreams, curated by Cecilia Alemani, along with a number of large European institutional solo shows at Lafayette Anticipation in Paris, the Museo in Bolzano, Kunstverein in Hamburg, also in collaboration with the New Museum in New York, and Tate Britain, among many others. We're incredibly excited to present Marguerite's show at ICA, which really, I think, is a huge departure and a completely new body of work that has evolved over the past year. And the exhibition imagines a future scenario in a post-human environment, and we'll dig much deeper into this at today's talk. However, before we start, I would like to also take a moment to acknowledge our sponsor and thank Private Client Select, formerly known as AIG Private Client Group, for the fourth year of this wonderful partnership and this incredibly generous support of the Marguerite Humeau exhibition. Private Client Select provides risk management solutions and insurance services to ensure private art collections remain safe for generations to come. So without further ado, I would like to enter with the first question. Starting from meticulously researched topics, often in collaboration with a wide variety of experts, ranging from anthropologists, foragers, clairvoyants, Marguerite kind of develops what-if scenarios that she kind of spins into this kind of speculative narrative. And speaking about narrative, I wanted to see if you could start introducing us to your exhibition Sky and what the context is.
For sure. So thank you for the introduction. So with Sky, it started actually last year in my head, later physically in the studio. So last year I was setting up a land art project called Horizons in Colorado. And it was in the San Luis Valley of Colorado, so it's a desert. It's been going through a mega drought, so I thought about it as a little bit like a space-time portal for what's going to happen to maybe most of us on Earth in the if not the near present, maybe the near future or the further future. And so being in the desert, I mean, obviously I was there with my team, and we had lots of people helping us. But the land was so huge; it was 160 acres. So wherever you would be feeling quite lonely, actually. So even if you knew there were humans around, you couldn't really see them. And so what really struck me there is that, yeah, at first you arrive and you think, there's nothing there, That's the first assumption. But actually spending a lot of time there, you realize that there is so much life. There's so much life in the ground. There's so many animals in the sky. And they live in absolutely, in very harsh conditions. It's very dry, it's very hot, it's very cold in the winter. And you have this kind of dust storms also. So that's been very tough to experience, because suddenly you have dust and sand picking up and like rolling like huge waves, and you're there alone. You don't really know where to hide because there's no tree, there's no barrier or nothing. So it got me to think about how will we have to adapt or even evolve in the future when these are the conditions we have to live in. So what I noticed is that their life is very resilient, very creative also, because to adapt to such a harsh environment, you have to be very creative, and also nomadic. So this was the premise for Sky, which is asking myself the question: will we have to become creatures of the air if we want to survive on Earth in the future?
And so, Marguerite, I have two kind of technical questions, because I think people who are entering the installation for the first time are just going to be so astounded by how otherworldly the forms are. First of all, could you talk a little bit just about how you generate those forms? And drawing is a big part of your work. And second, Stephanie alluded to this being a sort of turning point in your work, and for me that's your choice of materials. You used all sort of organic materials from life. How did these sort of things gestate in your studio in preparing the exhibition?
Yeah, so about the forms, we were talking earlier, like I'm a deeply conceptual artist, and I know it's very difficult for many people to comprehend, because many people think I start with the forms, but I don't really. So I always start with more like a feeling, like how do I want people to feel when they will enter this world, and when they will meet these new life forms? What is the feeling? You know, how do I want us humans to encounter these individuals, these families of creatures or life forms? So this is how I start, and then so what's been a little bit of a departure actually since maybe the past 3 years. So in the past, with my sculptures, I would draw them and I would design them, and we would develop these 3D models that we would then produce physically. But in the past 3 years, we've started to code the forms. So with this show, for example, the beginning was thinking about Earth that is burning. So Earth is burning, and a little bit like when you get a sunburn, it starts to peel off. So you have skin starting to peel off. So you have like layers and layers and layers that start to peel off and multiply. And then as they multiply, they start to fly vertically and become more like wings. So you have roots that become skin, that become skin, that become lots of skins, that become wings. So that's what we code. So almost like you would develop like a DNA code. We code them in a 3D software, and so we generate lots. So the code generates lots of different forms. And then I just, I guess I work almost a little bit like a collage, where I take the pieces of the code or the forms I find interesting, and I start to bring them together to create individuals, because I also always think of them as actual, individual characters. So I always think about the forms also in this regard, like maybe some of them, they're more like witnesses to the scene. Some of them seem to be talking together maybe. Some of them seem more like protective figures. Some of them are more like vulnerable figures. So when I look at all the forms, I also associate pieces of the generated form that I feel convey these different personalities. And then once in parallel with this show, what we did is that we hired amazing fashion designers actually, and for a full month and a half, we asked them to generate as many samples as possible. So we had lots of reference images from like tumbleweeds and sand and skin and root systems and like birds, like baby birds, when they come alive, they have this kind of furry, wingy texture. So anyway, we developed so many samples with different materials. And yes, at the end, I guess I connected the pieces of samples I found interesting with the forms we had generated, and I had like a collage together to start production.
I think it's really interesting. So you mentioned all the materials, and you use sculpture really to explore beings that are, to a certain extent, alive, or imagine life forms and creatures that don't exist yet or may have existed in the past in a certain form. But then to use sculpture as a vehicle to kind of bring these to life, I think there's an interesting tension. And I was wondering if you could also talk more about the materials that you're using that are natural, but also at the same time in the context of fine art, highly unusual. So you did pieces with snake and wasp venom, there's beeswax, there's silk.
Yeah, so I mean, again, because I don't really think of my sculptures as sculptures, I think of them as actually real characters that are alive. So, or maybe like spirits. So that's why we do a lot of material research, because I don't really want that anyone can actually identify how they're made of, and I really want that you feel when you meet them that they have a heart beating, that maybe they have a soul, maybe they could start moving, maybe they could start even talking to you, you know? So there is a lot of ambiguity in the materials we use, and we put a lot of effort, like producing this ambiguity. So in this specific show, we worked first of all with glass, because so we worked with a glass blower who generated lots of these forms. I guess the topic of the air is very present in the show, because we are meeting creatures that are, belong to the air. So I thought to work with a glass blower would make sense, because they use their own, lung capacity to create forms. So you actually you meet this creature as you enter the show that's almost like the fetus of a bird, or maybe some kind of primordial life form taken straight out of a pond. And again, with the glass blower, we work also quite experimentally to develop different textures of mold, and almost like the glass looks like very organic. Like so we look at plants, for example, when they decompose and they start to get moldy and a little bit wet. And so this is the work we do in glass. Then we work also with rubber, like this piece. That again we developed quite an experimental way of casting it by pouring different sediments and clay inside the rubber and working it in strata, like soil strata that are metamorphosing. And then when it comes to the flying creatures, they are made in blown glass as well, and also in silk and felt, so silk organza and wool felt, that we process intensively. So there are different things there are different ways we work with them. So we dye them. So to me, that's been actually really exciting, because also for the first time we produce most of the works inside the studio. So I could really work them almost like paintings, deciding on the exact dye bath that I wanted the sculptures to be born from, and we embellish them to create mold patterns. And then what's very exciting in terms of sculpture is we started to almost like cast fabrics. So we've used like techniques we've been using in the past. So using 3D forms that are being carved by robots to create molds. And then we developed a way to petrify the fabric with beeswax to make them look like other things. So depending on the sculpture, sometimes they look like bark or like clay or even like rock at times or like flesh. So it's really transforming, and depending on the dyes and embellishments we use, we manage to create this kind of variation of textures, which to me also express a sort of evolution throughout. So you meet a flock and they're individuals, but also they could be seen as mutations of the same body over time. So yeah, I mean, I think that's all the materials we've been using in this show.
You've referenced all of these conversations that are happening in the studio. And one of the things that's so beautiful about your practice is the way that it is so interdisciplinary and includes so many experts in so many different fields, whether it's Arthur, who's the producer, and Maudie, who runs the studio, and musicians and videographers, and Richard, who designed many of the fabrics. Now, you yourself have a rather untraditional path to where we are today. How did you get to where you are? And also, how do you organize on a daily basis all these incredible conversations that are happening in the studio?
So I don't really, Maudie, my studio manager does it for us. But yeah, so I mean, I studied design actually. So originally I studied textile design actually, and then industrial design. And quite quickly I realized that wasn't really for me. So I moved to London, where I studied under Dune and Rabi, who are speculative designers. So it was very, it was amazing to be there, because the department that doesn't exist anymore was gathering poets and designers and performers and dancers and all sorts of people to think about the future of humans in the context of developing technologies. So we spent a lot of time there developing speculative scenarios about, like where technologies has somehow affected humans. So that's actually, that is where I feel I'm still very much exploring like concepts that date from my time there in London. And then the collaborations we do, it's very organic. So I contact just out of the blue lots of people, like scientists and paleontologists and biologists, but also in the past couple of years I've started to work really closely with people who hold knowledge that hasn't necessarily made it to the official scientific realm. So like clairvoyants, geomancers, people who can read or feel presences in space on in different spaces, presences of humans of the past and the future, foragers. So this is part of the research process. And then when we develop a show, so we have lots of collaborators as well. So from musicians to sometimes voice specialists, engineers. And then in the studio, this time we had also an amazing team of very talented artisans and fashion designers. So sometimes holding very obscure craft as well, like specialists of embellishment, of different ways of making patterns for the fabric, etc. So we're a very small team. We're only 4 in the studio. But my team manages most of the collaborations when it comes to production, so I'm not doing it by myself.
And to talk a little bit more about the context of how these beautiful sculptures that you all fabricated, bringing them together in an exhibition context. So there's actually, which we haven't touched upon, there's a video that is part of the show. So I wanted to ask you if you could maybe talk more about that. And the video also has a very important sound component that many of your previous shows have also involved. And then you also decided to use a carpet that actually a lot of our audiences remarked on and reacted to immediately, which just creates a very different experience from the classic white cube that the museum usually stages the works in.
Yeah, so about the video, so in a way it was one of the starting points for the show, and if you have enough time, it's 24 minutes, so I know it's quite hard to find during this week, which is particularly busy. But if you have time to watch it all, you will see that there are lots of parallels between the sculptures, the landscape I've created, and the video. And actually, as a matter of fact, many of the reference images we had when we started working on the sculptures were actual screenshots of the footage from the video. So, for example, there's an insect in the pond that's being filmed that's in the video that is a little bit linked, maybe the cousin of the little glass piece you encounter when you first step in the show, and also many of the colors, etc. So we spent 2 weeks. So the video was shot on Horizon, so which is this land artwork in the desert that I was mentioning earlier. And we just spent 2 weeks there, and we just I didn't really have a script in my head at the time, but the brief was to film everything and everything else. So because the work was the land, and so we filmed the sky, we filmed the all life that we could find on the land. You will see it seems like the landscape is. That has been shot in different locations, but it's all been shot in one single location. And then I came back to London, and I looked at all the footage, and I started to create a story from the footage we had. So, I guess I did it the other way around. Normally you go on site shooting with a storyboard in mind, but I did it the exact opposite way. So looking at all the footage, I created this story, and so there are different chapters. Starting from the origin of life on Earth, and then the arrival of humans, maybe a scene that is reminiscent of maybe a prehistoric burial, and then the poisoning of the Earth, maybe, and then the invention of time, of artificial time, and of industrial practices, and then the time is accelerating, and suddenly you see it's there is this sort of clock agricultural device that seems to be spinning faster and faster and faster until it starts to there is a mutation of the Earth that is happening at this moment, and I see this scene as like in a way the starting point for the entire show actually. And so then we edited, and then I commissioned a musician to compose the score. So 2 different musicians actually 3 because one is a duo. So and it was actually the first time I worked on a score. So in the past I've worked with voice engineers. For example, I resuscitated the voice of Cleopatra to make her sing a song from her time. And so this was done, for example, with voice engineers. And also I created a world where elephants and not humans would have evolved on Earth. So with this piece, for example, I also worked with voice engineers to engineer evolved elephant voices and songs. And it was an opera, and it was composed, but it was not as musical. So this is really the first time that I commissioned a piece of music that is becoming also the musical landscape for all of the other works. And about the carpet, I don't really know how to comment on this, but when we were discussing the show with you, Alex, and Stephanie, we were talking about how do we transform this space that is so open to the outside world, because you have this huge, massive window that opens up to the sky and to the trees. And I was I still wanted it to feel like you're stepping into a parallel reality or a different world that you're not really used to. So it's kind of like, how do you create this difference in a way between the real world the world we live in, we inhabit, and this other world we are creating. And so we thought that maybe that by just laying out mold or sand or earth on the ground in the form of a carpet, that would create this slight change in how you comprehend the space.
Yeah, and it's also, it really resonates with the color of the walnut wood, and the sculptures really seem to carve and peel out of the ground. And you mentioned early on when we were talking about the show together, you said there is this quote by this art historian Petra Lange-Bernd who said the soil is full of decomposed bodies. So it's really kind of something rising out of the ground, I feel.
Yeah, I wanted it to feel kind of earth, but a bit moldy. So it's slightly gray. It's like a very specific shade of brown gray that we spend a lot of time choosing. Exactly. So there are, like in the show, there are also 3 floor sculptures that seem to be like extrusion of the soil. And they seem to be like the soil is unrooting itself and being like, is like lifting itself up and is kind of coming back to life. But there is also an ambiguity again, because they look a little bit like living dead, where you don't really know if what you're looking at is like a cadaver decomposing or a sort of life that is actually forming. So they're very much in movement. And one of them is growing flowers. But there's always a little twist in these sculptures, because it's growing flowers, but the flowers seem to already be moldy. So we don't know if they're like coming to life or if they're decomposing. And I like that mystery.
The word that you've used a few times in the conversation is speculative, which is a word that is adjacent to but not fiction. And for the last, say, decade or so, you've talked about some of the projects you've been thinking about origin stories, which is a very kind of deeply spiritual question to be asking. I want to just kind of lob at you a broad philosophical question, which is, how does your work think about kind of myth and where we are today? I mean, your work seems to always pose fundamental questions. For you, does that butt upon other kind of bigger environmental and spiritual questions? I know it does, but it's more interesting from you.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was very natural so I grew up in a Catholic family in France, and very quickly in my teenagehood, I realized that I don't really relate to the narrative. So I thought, I looked for other narratives, but I couldn't really make sense of it all. So I thought maybe I need to just design my own mythologies. So I guess that's been the quest of my life. Creating stories, creating mythologies for our contemporary era that take into account all the stories we've been telling to each other as humans since our prehistoric times, and that we still tell each other today, but also taking into account technological advancements and scientific discoveries. And so I'm trying to take it all into account and then create these new mythologies for our contemporary era. So that's my quest, and also another quest, I guess, that is adjacent to that, and I think that all mythologies are dealing with is the big question of what is life and what is death. And yes, what new technologies, or how are they changing these concepts? So in most of my works, most of the ecosystems I'm creating, beings are always in a state of metamorphosis, in a state of transformation, and you don't really know if they're dying or coming to life, and some of them have bodies, they have sculptural forms, but some of them are just voices, like I mentioned Cleopatra earlier. So really, it's thinking about what does it mean to be alive, and what is the bare minimum to be present, and what happens after we die, which are very basic questions, I guess.
And I think those of you in the audience who know some of your work from other contexts are familiar with sculpture that often alludes to fertility gods and kind of prehistoric ways of thinking about birth. And actually, throughout your work, including some of your earliest shows in New York, drawings of birth canals, birth sequences, these types of beginnings have been central to kind of the mythologies you're creating. Now, I wanted to use that to kind of think about something that I've never actually seen you talk about, which is, to me, the work is, at least from a historical perspective, quite anti-phallic. Like a lot of people working with large-scale sculpture are making like very masculine kind of gestures, and yours, in a really, elegant and concise way, are not that. They're often like glass vessels that are carrying, or just citations of fertility sculptures. How much are you thinking about that, and how much is that just your natural visual kind of language?
I didn't really think about it until many people told me that they feel I'm like always, that there is always like a very feminine, like a female character in the center of all of my works. So I started to realize it, which is completely true. And I don't really, it just comes really naturally. But also, I guess, maybe as I became more and more aware of it, maybe I've been actually digging more into this, and now I see that there is this kind of matriarchal figures that come back and back. So starting from, for example, the figure of a dying whale that is becoming spiritual because it's getting extinct, that I did in 2019. To the matriarchal like Venus figures I showed, at the New Museum in 2017. So there are matriarchs, like there is the elephant matriarch, which is dying and giving birth to this world where elephants are becoming more and more evolved and have developing sophisticating death rituals. And so I guess, the forms are like derived from these concepts, and sorry, I don't really know, because they're quite instinctual. It's quite instinctive. So I'm not sure how much all of this is very like kind of thought through as an anti, movement.
One of the things that also seems to run subconsciously through your work is wordplay. And for that, I would allude to the title Sky or Skay, or we're sort of leaving it open with asterisks. Could you talk, and I think this runs through a complex etymology that's in all the titles of the work. You talk a little bit about what that title means to you, and also why you're sort of citing archaic languages in prefacing the work?
Yeah, so Skay, it comes from the Proto-Indo-European language, which is one of our earliest ancestor. Is one of the early ancestor of some of the languages that are still spoken on Earth today. And it means, at the same time, it means shading and splitting, which I thought was pretty amazing, because that's exactly what I'm trying to do with this world, that it's shading because the Earth is burning and shading its skin, and splitting because it's starting to take off. So I thought that was amazing to see there was a word for that for these two concepts. In the Proto-Indo-European language. And the reason why... I was telling you, Alex, this morning that I don't think many people have realized, I'm not sure, but it also reads as a key to the sky, which I'm also quite excited about, because it feels like the world that is like the key to this other world that is happening in the sky. So actually I looked for origins, because also like that's what I'm doing with sculpture. So a big part of, it's not really part of my research, is more, I guess, part of my life. Like I look at early sculpture and where did sculpture come about in the history of humankind. And I always to me it's connected to my work on mythologies. So I look for patterns. So I'm really interested in comparative mythology, for example, like looking for stories that keep repeating themselves across time, but also space. So, for example, the story of the Great Flood, you can actually find in pretty much everywhere in the world. So this gets me, to me, mythologies are maybe biological. So I believe that we carry them within us, that they are like basic, like the core of each of these stories we share with all humans on Earth. So I try to understand what are the core forms the core stories we all carry and the core forms we all carry, because sculpture has been a very important vehicle to tell these stories through time. And so I do the same with words. When I try to come up with titles for my works or for the shows, I also try to look for the core concept, and so I look at ancient languages for that.
Well, I wanted to use this moment to thank you for sharing your world with us. I transition this in the way of wanting to enter some audience questions. I want to congratulate you, Marguerite, on a beautiful exhibition and on a fascinating studio practice. And thank you for sharing that with us. So congratulations. May I have a round of applause for Marguerite?
Thank you so much. It's been really amazing to work with you guys and with your team. So I think for my studio and I, we also owe you a huge thank you for this experience. Thank you so much.
Thanks. And there couldn't be a better environment to think about the Anthropocene than on Miami Beach at the Soho House Beach Tents. So thanks to Soho House for the amazing partnership year in and year out. Do we have, I think we might have time for like 2 audience questions, because there seems to be a lot of traffic in Miami. So do we have any hands in the audience? We have one over here.
Yes, thank you for sharing your work, all 3 of you with us. We were lucky enough to see the exhibit with Alex the other night, and what interested me about the exhibit in particular was its beauty, its uniqueness, but also its vulnerability. And I was worried about a lot of the pieces, because a lot of them are like this. They're very solid looking on the bottom, and then they have the branching structures, and some of them have blown glass on them, and they're in the middle, and I couldn't see any visual or physical barriers to your work. And so my question was, how do you as an artist, how do you as curators think about the vulnerability of the work in this case?
So maybe I can start with this question. So they don't look like, because we spend all of our life in the studio making them not look like that, but they are all like kind of feats of engineering actually. So our biggest collaborator in the studio is our engineers, and we always start like working hand in hand with them, sharing geometries with them and developing like very solid structures for all of them. So, but also a big part of our job in the studio is to make sure that none of this is visible. So it's a lot of work that we try to make look completely effortless. So maybe this is working. So yeah, and also we spend a lot of time doing R&D and material research. So we think very deeply about the materials and how they're being handled and how they will handle themselves once they are part of a physical sculpture. So it's a very important part of my work, and the experience I want to offer, that the sculptures feel like these creatures, they feel like very bodily and grounded, and they seem to all have a sort of life force that is animating them, but at the same time, I want them to feel that, like, you feel they could be moving at any time or collapsing at any time or maybe even disappearing at any time. So that's my side of the answer.
Well, I love that question because it's an institutional question, and we do take our commitment to stewardship very seriously, and the sculptures will not be disappearing anytime soon. It's a layered question, which may be only of varied interest to all of you here, but first of all, I'll say we have a very well-behaved audience at ICA Miami, and I've curated shows at other museums where far more things are broken, and I want to take a lot of pride in our stewardship over the last 10, 11 years. That said, and I don't thank and congratulate enough, we have an incredible staff who was really dedicated. Particularly, they know that I am very clumsy and perhaps the most likely to move my elbow into one of the sculptures, and I've been very close. So we did have a number of conversations, particularly around the opening, because we had a lot of people at the opening. Some of you were there, and it was super fun, about how to do this. And it's really complicated because the line between the floor and the sculpture itself is really significant formally for this work. So our solution for that was a pretty traditional solution, which was just to throw manpower on it. So we had a lot of really fabulous young museum professionals surrounding that work and using their bodies as shields. And we'll continue that, but with less intensity after the opening, and then you'll wish us luck.
There's a very iconic video that we have in the studio of our glass blower literally holding the cloud you see here and going like, see, it's really strong, spinning it in the air. So that became iconic. I think a lot of the pieces, obviously, I'm not saying you should, do whatever you want with them, but we work very hard on them that they're strong enough to hold themselves.
And just one last thing, because I'm quite interested in this question, is we talked about it as it relates to beeswax. I mean, beeswax is particularly because, we can, if you touch it, we'll read it for fingerprints and we'll find you. But she has a method with beeswax to iron it out. So she's actually thought about this quite conscientiously, the notion that if one were to touch it, which you won't, because we'll find you, that she could fix it and conserve it, and other conservators and whomever's lucky to acquire the work, etc., could fix it as well.
Do you want me to talk about this technique? So I tend to, I like to choose materials that you can feel exist in different states, So with wax, what I love about wax is that we all know it could be liquid, it can be solid, and it transforms, because we've all seen wax melting and, then drying again, So, and there are not so many materials that can really convey that. But I believe that even if you, because we know that when you see something made in wax, you have it in your head, so your experience of the thing you're looking at is different. The amazing thing with beeswax, and I think, yes, we've been slightly harassing a British wax company, which is the official provider of pure beeswax in the UK. So they've been able to answer all our questions. The amazing thing with pure beeswax is that it's very flexible. So as opposed to microcrystalline wax that is derived from oil, that tends to be a bit more brittle. It also has amazing qualities, but it tends to be slightly more brittle. Beeswax is very flexible, so it means that it's more likely to be responding to slight different shifts in context. And also the amazing thing we found is that it's very easy to manage, because if you have because basically you can melt it and you can remelt it, and we can heat it up. And so if you have slight changes in the surface because of something that's happened that we don't want to imagine here, but that could happen, you can just get a heat gun and you just heat it up, and that solves your problem. So So that's what we found.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Marguerite.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Congratulations.
much.
Thanks all for being here.